I want to start by letting everybody know that Jean Boland was not able to join us this morning, but I will say a couple things about Jean because she was the first that I invited here, and I'll tell you why in a moment. And Sadhvi, Bhagawati, Saraswati is going to be a little late. She had an urgent, unavoidable call to be on, and she said she'll be here late. And if we wanted to start without her, we never want to start without her, but we will. And catch her up a little bit, and she will slide right in. So we're here to talk about the a call to conscious through liminality towards a global ethic. This is a conversation. Some of you who know me, I typically am always talking about the empowerment of women or talking about divine feminine energy, and all of those things are very prevalent here. But I thought that this was more important to have a conversation about the global ethic, which runs above and below through everything, and it holds that promise for us as a humanity. And in the global ethic, it says the possibility of a better individual and global order leads individuals away from despair and societies away from chaos. And it also says we affirm that this truth is already known, yet to be lived in the heart and action. And we have a special responsibility for the welfare of all of humanity and care for planet Earth. And that sentence really intrigued me personally. It intrigued me because why is it that we know these things to be truths? And why isn't it that, where's the breakdown? Where's the breakdown between knowing this truth but not fully lived in heart and action, at least on a critical mass? I'm sure you each are here as seekers, as teachers, as listeners, and you hold that vision and that truth in your heart. But on a critical mass, where's the breakdown? And why, with all this information that we have coming at us, why don't we realize a global ethic or any of the charters that promise welcome, or any of the charters, like the Charter for Compassion, that promises this place where the world works for everyone. And then I heard this word liminal. And the first time I ever heard this word liminal was from Dr. Jean Boland. And besides it being a clunky word to say, I had never heard of it before. And through my research, I discovered that architects use this word to describe a hallway or a staircase or in a park area. It's the open space and how it's designed in the liminality. So it's not about the space, it's about how we use that space. And so exploring more about that, it made sense that liminality also exists between our call to action and our choice, our dilemma and our reaction. It's also the space between the notes and music that define the song. It's the cadence in poetry. It's the space on the Torah that is written by man, but it said that the space in between is where God resides. It's space of undeterminate time. It's Kairos time. And Kairos time is known to be the time in which the truth is discovered. So perhaps the answer to my dilemma with why do I know this stuff and I profess this stuff and this knowing that I find myself not living the global ethic. And what is and again, that word responsibility was very profound for me. Even Joseph Campbell says that in his book, The Man with 1,000 Faces, that liminal space takes place at the threshold between the known world and the unknown world. And I don't know about you, but I feel that unknown world calling us. And I don't know where we're going, but I know we're on our way. And I want to do what I can in my responsibility not to poison the water hole when we get there. And I'd like to think that that place is where the global ethic is the norm, where it's the culture. And a culture is nothing more than a critical mass agreeing to the same thing. And so what is it going to take for us? Now, in my research, I started to explore and actually also I wrote a book called The Liminal Odyssey, and in my writing, what poured out of me was an understanding that it was not just the practices I was doing, but I distilled them down to physiology as a practice, psychology as a practice, spirituality as a practice, and the trust frequency as a practice. And what happened is, as I'm writing, I'm practicing these all over and over again until they became one super skill for me. And the impact for that was more forgiveness, more compassion, more self-realization. So I'm like, I'm gonna work on that. And I discovered the super skill in those things. So when I thought about what could I bring to the Parliament if I were to do a panel, I want to talk about liminality. And I want to talk about these elements and this concept that I'm still exploring. But who in the world are the best people on the planet to speak about physiology, compassion, reverent listening, archetypal awareness, and spirituality? Sadhvi will be here as well, but you're going to hear spirituality from all of us. And the trust frequency, and you're looking at this esteemed panel that you're going to hear this from. This is my dream team. This is my dream vision. And every single one of them said yes, except for Jean, who had to back out. Jean, who speaks about archetypes and liminality and what happens in that. But we'll do our best to do her proud here today. So we're going to start here. And you know, when you have a panel like this, it's virtually impossible to figure out who goes first because there's not necessarily a design flow here. So I defaulted to divine masculine and divine feminine, which resides in all of us. And I'm going to start with the somebody I know to embody fully the divine masculine in the gendered male, and that's my friend Dr. James Doty. Thank you so much for being here. So I have a question for you, but I'm going to read it because it's early and it's been a long week. We're only a couple days in. So, Jim, as soon as I find my notes.
Jim.
How are you? Dr. Jim.
I am good.
Hold on, I'm gonna ask you.
How are you all?
Good.
Excellent.
Wonderful. Yes, sir.
I have a question right off.
Right off.
Let's
What
do
is
it.
this Liminal?
Liminal. Liminal. Let me say what liminal means. Liminal means threshold. It's a space between here and there. It's a space between all of us right now. As a matter of fact, why don't we take a moment and pay attention to the liminality between us right now.
Got it.
It's a liminal between heart and mind. It's a liminal between choice, call to action and choice. Wherever there's a space of undeterminate time, Kairos time, is
Correct.
liminality. And
Thanks.
it's what we do in that time. I'm happy to repeat that over and over and over again. So, Jim, as a neurosurgeon, educator, and researcher of the human condition of compassion, altruism, and love, individually and in systems, will you speak to the inherent condition of compassion that we embody and its impact on humanity?
Look who's here.
Oh,
Yay.
and we are graced with Sadhvi, Bhagawati, Saraswati. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and deep apologies for being late.
You're here.
Yes.
We're so happy. And we're just starting through the panel.
Beautiful.
And I'm going to hand you the microphone.
What was that question?
I don't remember. Just whatever you want. Just do it.
Well, I think, can you hear me? Do I have to do this?
Yeah,
Yeah,
doing well.
Yep.
You might get lip gloss on you, but no.
I mean, from my lips. Well, thank you all so much for being with us today. I think this is a very interesting topic to discuss because in some ways it's a realization that there is a transition between where we've been and where we can go and the infinite possibilities. And the question is, how do we unlock those possibilities to make them a reality? And unfortunately, the reality is that nothing comes easy, yet for many of us humans, we seek the easy path. And I think, though, that, well, how are you, sir? Welcome. Well, the easy path allows you to be alive. It doesn't allow you to really, truly live. And the distinction is that many people go through their lives and they're not really connecting. They're not connecting with themselves, and they're not deeply connecting with others. And in part, this is a manifestation of the modern world. If you think about many millennia ago, we lived in groups. We relied on those groups to protect us. We relied on those groups to support us, and also to educate us. And in some ways, if you look at what has happened, it's not necessarily for the good, because now we live in a society of disconnection. And really, I think the issues related to liminality are those associated with this disconnection and how we can reconnect. How many of you have heard of something called the blue zones? So the blue zones are these areas. I knew she would. The blue zones are these areas in the world where people typically live to be over 100. Now, I'm sure, though, you've seen these interviews with people who are over 100, and there'll be one guy who says, I smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and I drink a bottle of scotch, and I feel great. And then you'll see the other person who says, I'm on a vegan diet, and I exercise every day, and that's why I've lived this long. And those are outliers, actually, due to their genetics primarily. But if you look a little bit closer, on a larger scale, the reason these people live so long is because they are connected. And what I mean by that are these are people who are born in a village, if you will. They know everyone in the village. They die in the village. But the extraordinary thing about it is that everyone knows everything about them and offers unconditional love. And this unconditional love is the key to a full, meaningful, and a long life. And unfortunately, in this disconnected modern world, we aren't that connected. Many of us don't live in where our relatives or people we know. Demands are made on our time that exceed what we evolved as a species to attend to. And as a result, this creates an environment of stress and anxiety. And in fact, since the pandemic, this has gotten dramatically worse. So how do we get back to this place where we are, in fact, connected? And this comes into what I was talking about in regard to reconnecting. It's interesting because I'm sure many of you do not know me. That might be wise. But I study compassion, empathy, altruism, and fundamentally, see this what the modern world, we're seeing it in evidence right here.
That's intentional.
She's my prop lady.
Yeah.
But we study these issues of what makes us disconnected. And what's extraordinary, though, is that we can sort of reclaim that. And if we reclaim that, then that allows us to have infinite possibilities. And it allows us to see, if you will, the true nature of reality, which is this connection, this consciousness that ultimately is the key to our survival as a species. What many people don't realize is that when you're stressed, when you're anxious, when you're distracted, it interrupts this possibility. But it also interrupts, in fact, the best path in terms of brain function and your physiology. Interestingly, when you care for another, amazing things happen in terms of your brain. When you care for another, when you give unconditional love, when you embrace the other, it actually results in stimulation of your reward centers in your brain. And it also decreases the stimulation of this part of your brain called the amygdala, which is this area which gets activated when you're stressed, when you're anxious, when you're fearful. It also has a huge negative effect on your physiology. And the pathway through which this occurs is through something called the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that exits your brainstem and is distributed throughout all the organs in your body. And it's a two-way path. And it's especially present in your heart. And that's why so many of us hear about the mind or brain-heart connection, because it's extraordinarily powerful. When that is out of sync, what happens is it has a huge negative effect on your physiology. In fact, when it is out of sync, what happens? Well, your cardiac function is impaired. There's something called heart rate variability, which if you have an increase in heart rate variability, that actually is when your stress is increased, and it's associated with sudden cardiac death. When that sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, it results in the expression of stress hormones such as cortisol, which on a chronic level negatively affect you. It has an effect on your blood pressure. It has a profound effect on your immune system. And it has an effect on the production of inflammatory proteins, which are associated with chronic disease. Now, this may seem a little off center in terms of what we're talking about here, but actually it's extraordinarily connected. So when you are aligned, what happens? When you embrace this concept of love, of caring, of compassion, of empathy, it shifts you from this stress mode or stimulation of your sympathetic nervous system to engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system. And in fact, that has just the opposite effect. Your cardiac functions improve, your blood pressure is lowered, your stress hormones are dramatically decreased, your immune system is boosted, the production of inflammatory proteins decrease. And what that does is then it allows you to be able to truly see. It allows you to connect. You know, so many of us talk about different faith practices or spirituality. And the reality is that what they do for many, many people, they allow us to get centered again, to have a vision of the true nature of reality. And in some ways, it is above necessarily the dogma of the religion itself, but what sits above the dogma, which is love, connection, non-judgment, embracing the other. Ultimately, and the most powerful thing, and what will be the thing that saves our species and saves this world, is when you are able to look out and see the other as yourself. You see, and when you're able to do that, when you're able to see the goodness, the love within the other person, then this elevates you. And then this takes you from the place of simply being an observer on a ride to being the driver, and empowers you to have your own self-energy or self-agency. Because you see, that's part of the problem for many, many people. You see, they look outside of themselves for something that they think will answer the question for them or will give them the direction. But the reality is it's all here. And when you're able to look at the other as yourself, what you realize is we are all connected. And in fact, we are all one. And it is that oneness that will ultimately define this concept of this global ethic. When we all recognize that it is not me against you, it is we are all the same, we have all the goals, we have all the aspirations to not only make the world a better place, but to make everything within that world better and to be able to thrive. Yes, sir.
Didn't know if it was appropriate to ask at this time, but I want to be sure and say that, you have reminded me of a song. Put your hand in the hand of the man who steals the water.
That's right.
You know
Let's go.
what it also says? If you put your hand in the hand of the man who steals the water, and
Who knows the rest of the lyrics?
when you look at others, you will see yourself.
Right.
How's the song go?
You'll see yourself differently.
When you put your hand in the hand of the man who
Steals water.
Butter.
Put your hand in the hand of the man who calls the sea. Take a look at yourself, and you can look at others differently.
There you go.
It's that connection.
Exactly. More time.
Yeah, you got 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes? Jesus Christ, I was just starting. My God, this is so unfair, damn it.
There's so much more.
We're all with you, don't stress out about it.
No stress in this room.
Anyway, in summary, see, this is what I was thinking. In summary, what my goal was to help you understand that you have self-agency, but you have to look at the world through a different lens. And when you're able to do that, and programs like this and the work of so many of you actually give you the tools, the insight to do that. But you also have to remember that, so often we look at others and we make judgments about them before we know anything about them. And as a result, that limits our ability to connect. And the other side of it is that none of us know what is happening with the other person. And so many of the interactions we have with people are based on these judgments. But the reality is so many of people's actions are not because of what's happening at this moment. It's because of baggage that they've carried throughout their lives. And it's that baggage that oftentimes drive their choices. It'll drive the choices about their partner. It'll drive their choices about who they look at in certain ways. And you see, this is also the key. When you're able to gain awareness of the baggage that drives you, that makes you see the world a certain way, and when you're able to look at that and actually understand that that is baggage that you're carrying that's not helping you, then that releases you to get back to your center and realize the power you have, the power each of us has to change the world. So, thank you.
So, for me, what I'm hearing is the personal responsibility and self-agency. And once we recognize that, the choice of how we respond to whatever triggered us, whatever brought up some shadow energy, whatever it is that leads us in a direction that's destructive rather than healing, is in that liminal space. So we can stretch apart that space between getting triggered and remembering what you just heard and what you're about to hear today. And and for those of you who joined us just recently, and for Sadhvi, let me reset just a little bit. And talking about that liminality is we're exploring that space. we're stretching apart the spaces in between the physiology, between the spirituality, between recognizing what avatar, what personality is arising in me right now, and how it all works together as a beautiful, beautiful convergence. And so we're going popcorn style, and I just want to explain for Sadhvi that the order was designed by the divine masculine embodied, and will come to you as the defining divine feminine energy. But we'll probably go around again too. So so you know where we're at. Okay. Well, let's go popcorn style. I don't know.
What the hell is popcorn style?
Popcorn style is where we don't go in line. We just
like,
go around.
like popping popcorn.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, I'm so naive.
You've been in my presence before.
Well, I'm beginning to remember that now, and I get a little anxious.
I popcorn about. I think I'm going to change things up a bit. And I'd like to pop over to Connie because you brought up awareness. And let's talk about that, Connie. And Connie is the author of The Trust Frequency with her husband here, Andrew Cameron Bailey. And also, not just a very dear friend, but her book, The Trust Frequency, transformed my life dramatically and helped me. The two of them helped me, were my Trust Frequency editors of the Liminal Odyssey, the book. So I just wanted to let everyone know who they're about to hear from.
Yes, hello, hello. Is this working?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, good. So welcome. And it's just wonderful talking about the balance of the divine feminine and divine masculine. This audience is, I bet, almost perfectly balanced between the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine. So welcome. Yes, indeed. Jim has given us such a perfect example and instructions and insights into our personal responsibility and ability to listen to our divinity and to the aspects of ourselves that drive our behavior. And I want to just say that I'm a big picture thinker. I see big pictures. I see the coming of peace on earth and heaven on earth and how it's going to get here. And this has come through my own abilities, but also the questions I've asked. And the answers you get depend upon the questions you ask. And I asked at a young age, what is missing in our paradigm that has us out of balance, that isn't allowing us to align our hearts and our minds? So I went on a quest in my life for these missing pieces of the paradigm, and I went to Europe looking for them, and what did I discover? The same paradigm. And ultimately, visionary Native American elders came into my life, and I saw through them another way of being and seeing a universe, an interconnected universe, a place where every thought we have goes all around the earth. Wallace Black, a great Lakota elder, said those sorts of things, that I saw another reality, and I saw it as the true nature of the universe, the sacredness and oneness of all life. And this was in the 90s, and this fed my ability to see that we are all love, that there is only love in the universe. And I came to understand the nature of that love. And the nature of that love is unconditional. But the nature of unconditional love is that it gives us everything we ask for. What are our requests to this conscious, loving universe? Our consciousness. Okay, so we have a choice as to how we apply our consciousness. You asked about awareness. As we expand our awareness, we come into alignment with higher truths, with a reality that where the laws are expanded. It's a whole completely different reality when we access that place with our awareness. And so we have this, as I said, the consciousness determines our reality, And we have the 7 aspects of our consciousness that determine our frequency. It's a frequency thing, it's a vibratory thing, it's pure physics. And so if we understand our personal relationship with this universe, and we understand that it is in fact physics, it's energy, it's frequency, and there is a frequency where this connection exists, where when we access it, we become this global ethic. We walk it. We walk in alignment with our hearts because our hearts know this. Like you brought Jesus Christ into the conversation.
Did I?
Yeah.
Yes, you
I heard it.
Oh, hell.
Oh, heaven.
Oh, heaven.
Okay.
No.
So for me, he's a way shower into a higher reality. The things we call miracles are the true nature of the universe, our ability to heal, the love in our hearts, all those things, the abundance, the loaves and the fishes, okay? All right, there's more abundance than we can fathom in that frequency, okay? We have been in a frequency of scarcity, of fear, of separation. That's been the dominant energy on the planet, and we've been responding to that, and we've built systems according to that energy. And all races, all people have done their best in this frequency. And so there's no shame, no blame. We have had a job to do for all of creation, and that is to transmute these energies of fear, separation, and scarcity. And we've done a great job. So just everyone can pat themselves on the back and know that we've been in a process, and that now the earth is transitioning into a higher frequency, and we're being called forth into our hearts. And just the work that Jim's doing to show us the power of our hearts and our ability to align our minds and our hearts and the power of that. So his talk was very, very important for the specifics of how it applies to us and the medical, the science behind that. And so my vision, my knowing is that we're being called forth into our hearts, and that we're in a time of cleansing of old behaviors, old thoughts, old systems as they collapse. So everything in my world serves the coming of peace on earth and heaven on earth. Absolutely everything. So I just want to give you what we call the 7 A's, the 7 aspects of our consciousness that determine our reality by determining our frequency, our vibratory level. And I'm going to say those in one sentence. And listen to the modifiers of these A's. With expanded awareness, we choose our attitude, we consciously direct our attention, we align with our highest inner promptings, we take committed action, and allow the loving universe to manifest beyond our wildest dreams.
Repeat that.
Yes. And do you have that in writing somewhere?
You have to read the book. Buy the book. That's the only way you can get that information.
There it is. I brought mine to have it signed.
It's indigenous cosmology and quantum science synthesis. Okay, so it's the science Jim's talking about. It's quantum science, the new physics. I don't know if you're aware of the physics of Nassim Haramein, unified physics, resonantscience.org, and Dr. Jude Currivan, who is there, and Jude is bringing that indigenous melding with the physics.
Yeah.
She's astounding, and they both are.
Yeah.
And Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden, okay, the new science is showing us what Jim was talking about, and what the native people have known forever, and the rishis and all the spiritual deep people who understood this through the millennia, is that we are one. Okay, it's a fractal holographic universe. Okay, it's not just a theory. It's actually that everything exists in the smallest Planck scale thing is the universe. I mean, it's astounding. So every thought we have, every action we take, every emotion we have feeds a collective consciousness of the universe. Okay, so what we do, humanity, the love in the heart of humanity is key for all of creation. When we open our hearts and we walk in alignment with that, we shift all of creation. So it's just so important for us to understand the importance of our lives and of this alignment, and listening to all of these folks as to how to do that. And from my understanding, we have actually chosen to align with this divinity. Okay, we've already made the choice. It feels like, oh, are we going to get to the tipping point? Yes, we have to get to the tipping point, and this is that liminal space that we're in. We're in that time of choice. Are we going to align? Are we going to take that bold, committed action in alignment with our hearts and trust the loving universe? So how am I doing for time?
You're doing great. Keep going.
You have like 5 minutes if you want, or we can come back, whatever you like. Or
Okay.
wherever you, if
3,
you feel
5,
complete.
7,
Okay.
forever, whatever
So-
you'd like.
We can.
Well, would you talk a little bit more about awareness?
Oh, and there's a question
Oh.
here.
No, it's
Yeah.
not a question. I was just gonna say, if you prefer to come at this from a religious angle, or a religious and spiritual angle, Ilia Delio, Iliadelio, Franciscan sister, who is also a biologist, therefore a scientist, has this all wrapped together very neatly.
As a Franciscan nun does. As all, yeah, thank you.
It doesn't
Thank
make
you
any
so
difference. Everything you've said is exactly what
Yeah,
she says and does in all of her books. So.
Thank
She
you.
copied me, damn it.
Sorry.
Ilya, Ilya.
No,
It's all very, that
building
means
on
it's a
Sarah
universal,
then.
it's a universal truth, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I like this format, go right with it. Go ahead.
Sure.
So we are in a state where we have to move from thought to awareness.
From thought to
Awareness.
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 Yeah.
And that is what we're here to talk about. The liminal space between the two. It's what we do in that space
Sure.
that defines what comes next. So yes, absolutely. And you wanted to say something as well?
Yes, in response, I'm very aware of Ilia Delio, but I feel we need to hear this truth from many voices, many
Yes,
angles.
Yes.
I mean, it takes a lot, to live it every day. I mean, we're neophytes as much as we want to. We need to hear these reminders, we need these different images.
Yep.
I love what I've heard already, and so Jim, I've benefited greatly from you at Stanford. I'm so grateful to hear it again, and this woman whom
Connie.
I don't know.
Connie.
I find it so insightful what you're saying. So we need to hear everyone and how we're living it. It's hard work.
Oh,
Could I speak?
Yeah, you're next.
Yeah.
And I absolutely, and you can launch with that, that'd be great. Actually, let's come back around and talk about neuroplasticity.
Sure, but
So it becomes joyful, natural response. Okay, so let me properly introduce you. Connie, did you have more to add?
No.
Okay,
That's
well, we'll
okay.
come back if you do, and you can tell we're letting it roll, we're flowing like water. So, Pat Fero, Dr. Patricia Fero, and by the way, I didn't mention this, so you certainly can point your camera at the screen and find out more about each and every one of us, them today, but here you're hearing
The QR code.
the QR codes, yeah. So Pat Fero is a psychotherapist, and the first person that I heard use the term reverent listening. So when I was putting this panel together, naturally, reverent listening is an important part of this. It brings us to awareness. But when I called Pat, she said, yes, but I've been working on understanding better, studying internal family systems. And I'd like to talk about that, and that naturally requires reverent listening. And I know you want to respond to something, so you just take it from there.
Exactly that.
Welcome.
Okay, can I be heard well?
Yes.
Yeah.
My voice projects really
Yeah.
well too.
Probably not a good one to
We can hear you.
Okay, yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. This has been extraordinary for me so far today. I have been fiercely listening. That's one of my things I say. So,
Oh, fiercely.
no, that's all right. I got a lot of them. I just so as a therapist and as a seeker, one of the things that I'm on fire about right now is what's called internal family systems, which is actually, it's trauma work. And what happens, as I've been listening so far, is what stops us from this is our trauma, our unresolved trauma. And so the liminal space really is from that, I always get confused about sympathetic and parasympathetic. When we move from that activation, we're in that activation, and then we're disconnected. We're incredibly disconnected. But when we can move from that activated state into the ventral or sympathetic, whichever it is, then we're able to access the awareness. And the reason that I'm bringing that up right now is that there is extraordinary work being done on the planet with collective trauma, and it uses these models in dealing with the collective trauma, but is really actually able to work with large groups of people and ancestral lineage. We're learning about epidemiology, I think, epigenetics, and how we carry the trauma from our lineage, and maybe from, we carry trauma in our DNA from, I'll just say ancestral for now. So our capacity to heal this trauma is really pivotal in being able to access on a regular basis the kinds of awareness that Connie is talking about, and takes us where we want to go. So what's happening with neuroplasticity is that we're finding, the science and the religion are coming together, and we're learning about neuroplasticity, how we can change our brain, change our body, so that we're able to live in this what Stephen Porges calls the ventral state. We're able to live in that collective state, in that state, and we're able to return to that state quickly. So that's incredibly valuable. And as it happens, reverent listening, reverent engagement, I think is one of the things we talked about, is exactly what's happening in this room today. This man generously with the song, picked up the energy, brought us into this sense of kairos, that the experience of kairos that we're in today. We're feeling that sense of belonging. I keep watching you and connecting with your energy, and I've read much of your book, and I'm just so honored to be here with the energy that exists in this room. And I'm so grateful to be at the effect of the energy that exists in this room. Because one of the things that I've learned to do over the years is to listen fiercely to my own guidance that comes from within. So I'm simply speaking whatever wants to come through right now in this energy. I think there's one thing I want to say, Sande, about synchronicity, and that is that Jean Boland, at the beginning of COVID, early on in COVID, she used the term liminal space, that COVID was liminal space. And anybody that knows Jean Boland knows her brilliance. So she captured that energy, and then Sande and I were doing a lot of communicating at that time. And the word liminal caught your attention. And what's happening for me in knowing Sande and preparing to be here is I'm thinking more about liminal space myself. And so, as I said, I'm speaking off the cuff. So one of the things that came up, I came here to the Parliament with three magnificent women. I will announce us. We are the Diamond Portal. We've been meditating together for probably about 7 years. Every morning at this time, we're in Diamond Portal energy. And we've been holding this space throughout our time together. So let me see, where am I going with
I
that?
feel so separated from these.
Synchronicity.
Yeah, you know.
Synchronicity. Okay. Synchronicity. Okay. So where's that go?
You're holding the,
Oh,
you're holding the staff.
so with the synchronicity, with when Sande and I were experiencing so much, actually I encouraged her to write this book.
You just did that, yeah.
And I said, you're gonna do it, and she did it. and here we all are.
And that's such an understatement, that encouragement. That's a true understatement, and I didn't get a chance to.
That's all right, that's all right. So what's happening for me actually is I am tapping into that word, liminality, which I really hadn't done. It was a little hard for me to understand. But one of the women in our room this morning, we overslept.
Oh, good, you needed the rest.
Who's the we? Who's the we here?
All four of us overslept. And so, and I didn't want to be late for your workshop, and we overslept. And we're starting to run around like chickens with our heads cut off. And so, because of a conversation we had last night, talking about an example that one of the women gave, that when she has young children, when she is in that energy, that she stops, like, I'll just leave mine here, that she just stops and tunes in and moves into liminal space and then takes her next action. What a really powerful reminder if we could do that throughout our days. So as we're running around like chickens with our heads cut off in the hotel room, I said, let's make this liminal space. So that's what we did. We got here in our liminal space. We carried the energy of the Diamond Portal across the bridge into the room. I think I'm done talking for now.
Oh, please, no. No, actually,
Okay.
no, I'm not gonna lie. And as it turned out, your timing was impeccable.
Yeah, it was.
And we were all just flowing. Did you you were about to say something?
I felt I was being harassed. I'm out of the diamond.
Of the Diamond Portal. It is an exclusive club.
But there is a thing about that you said that I wanted to say,
Use
and
your
that
mic, use
is
your mic.
that is laughter. What happens with humor and laughter, we're all in the same energy at the same time, and play. So you said that, so that's all.
Good.
Would you take some more time, Pat? And would you take some? And by the way, I have been a recipient for a couple of years now of Pat's reverent listening, and the power it has. There's a saying that goes, to listen another soul into a condition of discovery and disclosure may almost be the greatest service one human performs for another. And I have received that from Pat in such an unconditional way. I've heard so far a lot about unconditional love and awareness. And can you talk about let everyone know what interfamily systems is?
Yeah.
And also what unconditional love has to do with that.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So I really don't like the name internal family systems because you think it's about family systems. It is about family systems, but it's about our own internal family. So what happens, I imagine a lot of people know Sandra Ingerman's work of soul retrieval. What happens is as we have trauma in our life, as therapists we call it defensive structures, but parts of ourselves go into hiding. They split off because they're too overwhelmed. They can't tolerate the harshness of life, so they go into hiding. And then we create other parts that help us function in this insanity that we live in. So they're called managers, protectors, it can be, let me see if there's more. There's Exiles. The exiles are the ones that go into hiding, and then the managers and protectors help us function. So what internal family systems does is it helps us access all of these parts. And then as we access these parts, we heal the parts. They're able to come out in a safe energy of awareness between the therapist and the client. And then as they emerge and they tell their story and they express their experiences, they're held by the higher self, I'll use that term, conscious awareness, and then they say what needs to be expressed, and then part of the system is that they call it burdens. These are burdens that these little Richard Schwartz calls them little inner spiritual beings. They exist within us, like avatars, and then they're able to share what their burdens have been, tell their story, and then they're able to release their burdens in the energy of higher consciousness, and we release to the elements, to the fire, to the water, and it's kind of like magic. It's absolutely amazing. So this is one of the most effective trauma theories or trauma modalities that I've ever seen, and I've been working in the field for 40 years.
You started when you were 5?
You do have a good sense of humor.
Thank you for explaining that. I've heard it described as like peeling back the layers of a globe of garlic. Unlike typical, we hear the expression an onion, but a garlic is made up of so many different parts underneath its skin.
Exactly.
And that each one of those parts have their job to do. And for me personally, my experience has been recognizing it as a protector. What's it protecting me from? Rather than annihilating it or shaming myself for it, going, okay, what does this part have to, what is it showing me? And last night I had an awareness I was triggered by an individual. And it came to me, they're an avatar of my shadow side. What I couldn't be bothered by this individual or these individuals if there wasn't something I had to learn from that, and if there wasn't a part of me that I needed to. So that one finger pointing out had 3 more coming back at me pretty strongly last night in the bathtub while I was soaking my feet.
And that's a really important piece. Schwartz's most recent book is called No Bad Parts, because they're all created in our service. Yeah.
Speaking of no bad parts.
This young lady.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just, going back to something Jim said about the extended family, because I think you really hit the kernels. We could have avoided a lot of this fragmentation that we're all dealing with, a lot of this suppression, had we lived in a society where we had more reliance on the extended family to support us. Our extended, the church used to hold that for us. Society used to hold that for us. Our neighborhoods used to hold that for us. And you gave us this scientific backbone of how that impacts at triggering our fear responses. And I think everybody in this room has felt that. It's a commonality. Absolutely believe in everything you just said. And I got there through the very, rigorous meditation, but it got to the same place. And I'm so excited about everything you're doing. Yet, the distance, the liminality, that distance, there's been some forced separation that our society has kind of wedged there, whether it's wedging the theocracy between you and God, whether it's wedging the cell phone or the social media between you and your sister, who is me, who is one. It's kind of like we're living in a world where what is put up on media is things that separate us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you for that
Allowance.
contribution. I really appreciate it. And that it's that separation. Remember, there really isn't any
We have a couple
separation.
more questions, but we probably should also get to Sadhvi.
Yeah, I would love to get to Sadhvi and Savior. If you wouldn't mind, don't forget what's important that needs to be said right now. If you can hold on for a moment to hear from our next speaker. Thank you so much. Unless you got a song.
It's gonna be difficult, but I'm gonna try to wait.
No, hold on. I know you will. Thank you. Okay. And it is, a real honor, speaking about that first, right, to introduce Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati. Arguably one of the world's most revered spiritual leaders, scientific minds, spirit-led activists.
And friend.
Friend and sister, no separation here. And his book, Hollywood of the Himalayas, I just devoured and savored, and I can say the only thing that I didn't like about it is that it came to an end for me. I know there's another book coming out. There must be, I hope, I'm praying, I'm willing it into being. And I'm just so grateful for you because I'm still soaking in everything I just listened to because I had it on Audible. In it you write about being awoken out of spiritual ecstasy and universal oneness into being triggered into patterns of trauma-informed reactions, which I think were perhaps that just proves to me you're actually, I won't say, okay, she is human, but please speak to that.
Very human, and it's such a joy to be with you. Such a joy to just have this opportunity to sit together. You were speaking about these spaces. Typically when I speak about spaciousness, it's a positive aspect. It's something we want to create. And yet as you speak about these spaces, it's that which can be seen as negative, that which is keeping us from the connection we need so much. And just being here today feels like we're closing those spaces. We're coming back together. And I was thinking as I was listening to you of one of my favorite teachings. I originally come from California. That's the Hollywood of the Hollywood to the Himalayas journey. I literally grew up in Hollywood, but I went to Stanford University and then was doing my PhD there as well in Palo Alto and spent a lot of time in the Bay Area therefore. And I'm a nature person, mountains, trees. And as I've been listening to this importance of connection, I was thinking about one of my really favorite teachings, which is that the redwood trees, which to me life in general is sacred. Trees are sacred. Nature is sacred. And the redwoods have something in them, for me, that feels like a doorway, an opening that is so accessible. You just hug a redwood and it feels like some exquisite spiritual science fiction movie where you sort of tap into that opening into all that ever was, all that ever is, all that ever could be, the entire divine universe. And I mention that just for a moment quickly because the redwood trees, aside from always being deeply sacred to me, are in many cases some of the oldest and tallest trees in the world. California has fires and earthquakes and so much else. And yet, they manage to stay not only tallest trees, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet tall, but in many cases, 800, 900, 1,000-year-old trees. But their roots are not contrary to what we would assume, very, very deep in the ground. What they are is interconnected with the roots of every other tree in the redwood forest. And that to me is such a beautiful message. And I was thinking about that as you were speaking about this connection, and as Jim spoke about the way that this unconditional love through an extended community, whether of blood or just of proximity, but this real community, and the way that it absolutely nourishes and nurtures and sustains and supports us. And so just to take a moment before I answer your question to appreciate you bringing us all together in community, and to remind all of us that a takeaway from here is, how do we go out and create community? You know, we could have a therapy session about how we didn't feel unconditional love from our families of origin. But as interesting as that might be, it's not necessarily going to take us into a different present and future. The question becomes, how do we now create that? How do we be it for others? And how do we create that? You can't force anybody to love you unconditionally, of course, but you certainly can bring a lot of attention and intention into creating community. And that community is what supports and sustains and nourishes and nurtures us like the redwoods. Now, back to your question, Sande, and I've been making some notes as everybody's been speaking, because there's been so much that has been said that I've connected to so deeply and wanted to respond to and share on. But first, in response to your question, September, just next month, will be 27 years that I've been living in India, in a beautiful place called Rishikesh on the banks of the sacred Ganga, the Ganges River, in the lap of the Himalayas. And I went as a 25-year-old student with a backpack in the middle of a PhD program. And I won't go into the whole story now. Sande has just given such a loving mention of Hollywood to the Himalayas, so it is all there. But what I had was an extraordinary spiritual experience. Unexpected, unsought for on any conscious level. I don't even get credit for having consciously looked for it or tried to find it. It happened by grace. And I spent the first days, weeks, months in this state that was so different from my stressed out 25-year-old student. I mean, it was the exact antithesis of everything I had ever thought about myself, which was, I am my body, I am my story, I am my grades, I am my relationships, I am the pimple on my nose, I am the extra pounds that I gained that I shouldn't have gained. Like, I really was this, you are your body, you are your story, you are your successes, and you are your suffering. And I, of course, had my own experience of that in my life. And I really identified with it. This is who I am. Victim of this, survivor of that, one who struggles with this, one who's working through this, one who's learned to manage that, one who's good at this. And that was me, separate from God, separate from any sense of a higher self. In fact, as just a quick sort of humorous aside in the story, as you talk about higher self, one of the ramifications for me of the struggles that I had had and the suffering that I had had was I had developed a very severe eating disorder. I was very severely bulimic in my adolescence and in and out of hospitals, and I had been sent to a 12-step program in order to work through that. And I was so separate from and uninterested in the idea even of a higher self that I remember after the first, I don't know, few weeks, maybe a month or so of the 12-step program I was in, essentially saying, I can't do this anymore because if I don't take responsibility, I'm going to die from this eating disorder. What I had gotten to a place of doing was saying, oh, look, here I am suffering again. Well, I guess my higher self didn't come in and save this. I guess my higher self didn't do what it was supposed to do. I've surrendered to it. It was supposed to save the day. It didn't. Therefore, this isn't going to work for me. And that was sort of the beginning and the end of my willingness to even connect with the idea of a higher self. And then you fast forward a few years, and there I was on the banks of Ganga, and I had this experience. And it was an experience of being in the presence of the divine that was more powerful, more real, more true, not just theoretically, but palpably. I didn't just know it with my heart and intuition, but I knew it with my senses, my eyes, my ears, and when I saw it, I heard it, I felt it. And it transformed me, obviously. And it was ecstatic. Ecstatic for days, weeks, months. And I was living in this state of just ecstatic union. And then, as in the point that you refer to, a moment arose, a situation totally irrelevant in the important moments of our life. It was you mentioned somebody had triggered you yesterday. It was one of those. It was a random, unimportant situation that nonetheless had triggered in me. And I went to my guru and I was bereft. This person had said this thing about me and I had heard about it because somebody had come and had told me in one of those, well, you know, I really shouldn't say this, but I thought you should know type of moments. And it devastated me. And I went to him and I was bereft and devastated and in tears. And he looked at me with the incredulousness of what I've now learned is really common in enlightened Eastern masters. I've heard it with friends of mine who have studied with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who have studied with other enlightened Buddhist masters, Hindu masters, where they're so living in the oneness and the divinity that the idea of where our minds even go is inconceivable to them. And he looks at me and he says, "You are the stupidest smart person I've ever met." And as I said in that passage that you mentioned, it was the slap awake. It was a slap awake. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. He was like, really? She says, he says, and all of the rest? And it was a slap awake. And in terms of what we're discussing today, it was a very important moment because it was for me the beginning of that which was going to really blossom in me and become something very important, which is that yes and of spirituality and humanity. That yes, I am one with the divine. Yes, I am anchored and grounded in the perfection of the universe. And yes, I cry when I see a child who's hungry. I cried Hallmark commercials, for God's sakes. And yes, there is an extraordinarily beautiful, actually, element of our humanity. And sometimes it arises in sadness, grief. Sometimes it arises in ecstasy. Sometimes it arises in struggle, and however it arises, but that it is not something to be pushed away, that in order to be spiritual, you don't have to no longer be human. But I've come to think of it, and this is where for me spaciousness is the positive, of a yes and. There is space for me to live in an awareness of, an experience of soul, spirit, divinity, perfection, divine presence, and fury. That in today's day and age, women are still dying in childbirth. That children are dying of starvation while we eat hamburgers that are taking the grain that should be feeding them and feeding it to cows instead, so that 90% of our grain gets cycled like that. That somehow our waters are being polluted, our air is being polluted. I mean, so this yes and experience is one that for me has become very, very beautiful. And to have the opportunity to switch from a focus. It's not a switching of aspects of the self so much, for me, my experience. It's more of a switching of that which I'm focusing on. You know when they give you those optical games where it's like, do you see the old woman or the young woman? Do you see the vase or do you see the two profiles, right? And it's not that one is right, one is wrong. It's not that you're going from one to the other. It's this ability to simply, with attention and intention, be with one or with the other at that moment. And then ideally, of course, to actually be with both, to be able to see them both. So for me, that's been the experience. I lose track of time when I'm talking. I have no idea where I am time-wise.
Oh, and I'm swept up myself.
I have so many other things that have arisen that I would love to share, but if I'm way over time, I'm happy to stop.
You actually 4-ish minutes.
Lovely, lovely. So I wanted to speak as I've been listening and just bathing in what all of you have said and even what all of you have shared. Somebody spoke about the aspect that we are creating that which we are, and that which is here is that which we are manifesting. And there's a beautiful teaching in the Vedas that says, Yatha Pinde Tatha Brahmanya. And it means as is the individual, so is the divine universe. And so to really just re-emphasize that each of us, within ourselves and in that which we manifest, is creating and co-creating the world. And this is one of those places that I love. I think it was you, but it might have been Connie who spoke to, where science and spirituality overlap. And as someone who comes from a world of science and is now in a world of spirituality, I love where that happens. And as we look at quantum science and quantum physics these days, one of my favorite new discoveries that they talk about is the observer effect. Because of course, when I was in school with Newtonian physics, we had waves and we had particles. Things were either energy or they were matter. Then slowly they started to say, well, actually, sometimes waves behave like particles and sometimes particles behave like waves. And then And a lot of that work was being done at Stanford when I was there, so I'm listening to people talk about it. And then, now there's something they're calling the observer effect, which as far as I've understood it, literally means whether it's a particle or a wave, whether it's energy or matter, depends on who's looking.
My goodness.
Right? Right? I mean, so this is now what science is discovering. Is it energy? Is it matter? Well, who's looking? And it reminded me of one of my first experiences in India, and one of the things that's arisen so much today is the power of choice. The power of choice. Jim said, we don't know what someone else is experiencing, what they're going through, what their story is, and all we have is the power to choose our vision. And when I first was in India, I decided I was going to wear saris. I love them. They're beautiful and graceful and elegant, and I loved the way the Indian women looked in saris. And I didn't tie them very well. There's when you wear a sari, there's two places for pleats. One is down here at the bottom. The other, in the way that most of the fashionable Indian women wear them, is they also pleat this part up here. And so you'll see sort of pleats down here and then pleats across. And I used to do that. Not well. And I found that as I walked through not only the ashram, but the marketplace, these random Indian women would come up to me to fix my sari. Now, the places that the pleats come together literally is kind of just below the navel here at your underwear line, or here at the bra line. And I would have these women come up and literally stick their hands in my clothes and fix my saris. And the first time it happened, I was walking through the street. And I remember after she did that, she came up, she stuck her hand in my sari, fixed it, proceeded on her merry way. I stood there and I thought, I've been violated. That woman just stuck her hands in my underwear. I don't even know her. And I stood there with that, I am just about to develop PTSD experience. And I realized that that woman actually did to me exactly what she would have done to her own daughter if her own daughter was walking out of the house in a poorly tied sari. And that I had an option to either have been violated or to have been adopted. And that choice was going to determine how I lived in India. Because of course in India there's no such thing as social space. So, here where you and I are sitting, this feels about appropriate. Like we're good. Well, in India, and especially at our ashram in this beautiful Aarti ceremony, lighting ceremony we have each night on the river, that's a space for another human person. Like you and I feel good, but that's not room for another person. But in India, that is. And so somebody would come in and sit there, and their knees are on your knees or in your lap, and I realized very quickly that my choice was to feel continually violated or to feel continually adopted. That people were acting as members of a family in the same way that you would do to a sister or a brother or your mother or your father or your child. Nobody would think twice about sticking your knee on the legs of your mother or father or sister or brother. But I was being adopted. And so I think that power of choice that you spoke to is so, so important. And lastly, not the last of the points that I made, but just the last of the ones that I have time to mention right now. You spoke about trauma and the ritual of freeing ourselves from trauma. And that was something that for me was so critical, so important, and something that I've been really committed to teaching and sharing, because we hold trauma, and I held trauma as an identity. This is who I am. I was traumatized. I had been abused. I had been abandoned. Here's what I went through. This is me. And a few days after meeting my guru, he looks at me and he says, "Are you going to take that to the grave with you?" I was 25. "You're going to take it to the grave?" I said, "God, no." He said, "So are you going to let it go on your deathbed? Maybe a month before you die, maybe a week before you die?" And I'm staring at him. No. And I said, I'm in therapy. I'm in process. I'm working on it. And he looked at me and he said, "You're waiting for someone to draw the line. You're waiting for someone to come in and tell you you can be done." He said, "No one will. You can take it to your grave. You can let it go on your deathbed. You can let it go a week or a month before you die, or you can let it go tonight." And I was like, "Tonight?" And he said, "Yeah, tonight. We have this beautiful ceremony on the banks of the sacred river. And after that, I want you to stand in the river, in Ganga, in the Ganges, and offer your pain and your anger to the river." And I remember thinking, thank God I come from a world where we understand process, and we understand therapy, and we understand psychology, and we understand this and that, and we don't have to rely on rivers to sweep away our pain, because clearly they can't. And I was so indoctrinated, embarrassingly, in retrospect, indoctrinated into a belief pattern of what healing was. But I did it. I walked into the river thinking there's no way this is going to work, but I'm going to do it with respect and sincerity. And what I can tell you 27 years later is it worked. But it was that experience of letting go as a ritual into the universe, into the divine universe, in my case, into a mother goddess river, and really being prepared and willing to let go. And that is something that I've realized is not only possible for me, but it's possible for all of us, to be able to actually let go of that trauma. So thank you for speaking tonight.
Thank you.
It's very hard to follow what you just said, because you said it all. You've actually captured every note that I had taken to close us today, or open us to what's next in this liminal space, Sadhvi. Thank you so much to every one of you for being here and for being embodiments of what you say, what you teach, and what you exactly your model for us. So this gentleman has a question that Connie went. Oh,
I have a question. Thank you for everything. Thank you for everything. Let it be a
Question.
But my question is, you kind of touched on it, and the question that I'm having is, how do we do this in community? Because people in society are disconnected. Our society does not support community, and I'm a priest, psychologist, so people are looking for spirituality and connection. They're looking for their own diamond portal
Yeah.
group.
Mhm.
You know, they're starving for
Yes, yes. And,
So what, can you apply, like, in 2 or 3 minutes, yeah? What you've said, how do we do this for community?
Oh God, it's such an important question, and
That's the question of the day.
my work has been the feminine. I call it the role of the collective feminine and planetary awakening. That's my work, and you men have had such a hard time with our conditioning, and vulnerability's not allowed. Individualism is all that is good, and dominance is dominant. That's the way you've all been conditioned. So how do you men find ways to come together in community through your hearts? Now I do know, Clay Boykin does that beautiful work, The Compassionate Male. But it's beautiful work for you men. You men so need to find ways to be together in community. So it's about the heart. It's about the male heart. And one of the things that I have been learning here and there is really men and their hearts is, I don't even know how to say it, but kind of in prophecy and different places, I don't even know where, that it's really about men and the heart. Men connecting with your hearts and then being in community. It's enormously important, and I think it's possible, but I think it's through the heart. Men connecting with other men, heart to heart, finding safety somehow with one another.
But even men connecting with the women's movement connecting with men.
Supporting one another completely. Well, and that's what I'm saying. Well, that's the best I got.
Sandy's an expert on building community. I just want to say, if anyone can figure it out, it's you.
I am happy to respond as well, but please, Jim, let's talk. Let's hear it from a man with a heart. Do you have an answer?
Held up.
Humor.
Well,
Wait, excuse me.
Oh, she turned it off.
I have seen this gentleman break down, completely touch. He's such an alignment with his divine feminine, with those emotions, with those things that you're talking about, the wounded male breakthrough. I've seen him break down, and perhaps you can attest to this, in a stadium of 18,000 people in tears.
I did that?
I've been in your audience more than a few times.
Well, what I was going to say is that so many men are so afraid of showing their emotional self or their vulnerability, and actually I think it's true in general, but especially among men, because they're so afraid of being judged. And I think that the key is to accept that it's okay, but it's very hard, and so we have to do it through example. It's interesting though how society somehow, I think you mentioned they put these burdens on you or define you a certain way. So I was giving a talk one time where I actually, and believe me, it's not uncommon for me to shed a tear, for my voice to crack. And I had a woman come up to me afterwards, and she said, "I felt so sorry for you." I'm looking at her, she goes, "You must have been so embarrassed to break down in front of these people, and everybody's like looking at you." And I'm like, I'm actually sort of shocked. And here's her next statement, which was extraordinary. She said, "I'm a psychiatrist." She said, "I'm a psychiatrist and a therapist. And a therapist, if you come for me for 3 sessions, I'll get rid of that for you." If I have any superpower, it is the superpower of showing my emotions, right? Because people connect with it.
Yeah.
So that is the key, is not to be afraid, is to accept the reality that every one of us is a frail, fragile human being who's doing the best they can. And if somebody's going to judge you because they've decided you're not good enough or whatever it is, that's their problem. It's not your problem. but you have to have the confidence and the ability to just be with yourself and say it's okay. And I think that's hard. But I think what you're seeing here, where we're hearing more about the divine feminine, but also the reality that so many men want to change how they're perceived in society. And frankly, what we have done from a patriarchal point of view, while it may have worked on the savannah in Africa, it is ineffective in the modern world. So we have to look in another way. And for some of you, I gave a talk, which I mentioned a little bit earlier to my colleagues here, at something called TEDx UN Plaza. And there's a talk that I gave which was called Compassion, Feminism, and Women's Empowerment. But at the end of it, I actually read a poem. And it was a modified poem, but it started as, if I were a girl, but the other side of it was a girl says, I wish I could be honored. For my intellect, but the boy says, I wish I could be honored for my vulnerability, right?
Wow.
So it goes back and forth here. And then it honors the girl at the end by the boy saying something, because you have taken a step forward, it has allowed me to be who I am.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't have anything.
That's okay, I got you to cry. I'm complete.
See, this is what she does.
I didn't get him to cry. I would like to thank you so much for pointing out community building, because it's all about community. I think what you're talking about is a critical mass, right? You're talking about creating a culture of a global ethic or compassion or a global ethic where we are okay with someone running up to us and fixing our hair, stuffing their hands down our sorry to help us. I just love that. That's something I would do today. So I'm glad to know that I am not invading anybody's personal space, although I ask first now. But and this culture, but a culture is nothing more than a collective agreement by all of us, and that brings us back to us. So it has to start here. It has to start with you modeling the vulnerable, compassionate male, perhaps. And us, women, I'm speaking us, and those who identify as women are embodied with the aspects of the feminine body also. We have a responsibility and a privilege to support you.
Yeah.
And, you know, in 2006, I was invited to Harvard to Diana X. Pluralism Project was investigating the women's interfaith movement as the fourth wave of feminism, whereas the last movements have been about pounding the pavement and pumping our fists and demanding and, you know, overcharging our masculinity to become equal. And we did make strides, of course, we did see results, but this movement is different. Now we're conforming to our higher and our deeper value systems. Now, and I just love Erin here, who, please go to the Women's Village when we're done here, so you're gonna pass right by it. You'll see staffs, because according to Indigenous prophecy, the staff has been passed to the feminine. And I saw a picture of this gorgeous one standing there holding a staff. It was a spear. And so I said, oh, you must come. And she created these gorgeous staffs that are on display in the Women's Village to remind us to anchor our divine feminine. But I think they're also for the men, to anchor us. And your point you made yesterday in a workshop you led was that now, unlike a pointy spear that can cut through the patriarchy, if you will, now you're cutting through the patriarchy with a feather. There's no point at the top of any of those staffs. Is this a work? Are you in this room next? Okay, good. I just want to make sure we're not invading anybody's space, but you have to go.
Yeah.
I would like to take this time then to wrap this up. So I'm sorry, I'm on a roll. I want to thank you. I bow so deeply to every one of you. I bow so deeply to every one of you. We've heard about personal responsibility. We've heard about our privilege. We've heard from these extraordinary ones who are bringing us so much shared knowledge and lived experience. Thank you is an understatement.
Thank you, Sande, so much for bringing us together in love and community. As we
Yes.
come in unity.
And here we are.